All right. So this chapter has been speaking about, chapter 9, obviously, has been speaking about the struggle between the animal soul and the divine soul. They each wish to conquer this entity right here, this being. And in a way, he went on to speak, the author of the Tanya, of this two-level combat mode that the divine soul can engage in order to overcome the animal soul, as we're speaking about the struggle of the two. So the first level is what's called itkafia, which means to subdue. The second level is called hitapcha, which means to transform. Now, it is true, I think, in any type of conflict in this world. First, we have to subdue. First, we have to take control. And once we've taken control, then we can transform that which we have taken control of. And this is really the approach that we should have towards the animal soul, towards any type of evil thoughts or speech or actions. And we have to take control of the situation first and foremost and ensure that the divine soul is the one that is in full control, is in the driver's seat, so to speak. And then we can say, okay, I had this evil desire, now I've taken control over it. How can I channel the power of this desire towards the good? And therefore, how can I transform it? So just to give you an example quickly, and then we'll get to page 237 here, but just to give you a quick example, if, for example, I don't know, I love to eat because my animal soul loves to eat. It just loves the pleasure of eating. No, there's no sanctity in eating. There's no real purpose in eating. I just love to eat. It's purely a materialistic exercise or hobby that I have. Now, that comes from the animal soul. We should be controlled by the divine soul. So what can the divine soul do in such a case? The divine soul can say, well, let me take control, first of all, of my eating habits. Let's see, am I eating right? Am I eating for the right purposes? Let me take control of eating altogether. Once I've taken control, that's called, again, iskafia. Once I've taken, by the way, the best way to take control sometimes in eating and in other types of animalistic desires is to say to ourselves, well, I'm going to not do it now. Let's say I have an urge to eat, just to use the same example. I'm not going to do it now. I'll wait 5 minutes. That in of itself can subdue that desire, that animalistic desire. But once I've taken that full control of the animalistic desire of eating, then I can say to myself, okay, where did this come from? And how can I channel the hobby of eating for a divine purpose? Because that's what the divine soul wants to do, to channel our entire being towards the divine. And then we can say, okay, I'll be eating to use the energy of food to do good. I'll be eating on Shabbat and festival to celebrate the Shabbat. Then my eating is not just purely animalistic. Then my eating, in a way, is transformed to serve the divine. So those are the two levels that we've been speaking about, that this chapter has been speaking about. And now we're going into page 237. We're going into this state of mind, or even a state of being, that when a person is able to transform his animalistic desires and channel them towards the divine, then he can reach this ultimate state of connection with God. Because then his entire being is one with God. He's transformed his animal soul, so to speak, or his animalistic desires at least, to serve God. And that connection with God is called ahava b'tanugim, just to quote the Hebrew, which is translated here as love of delights. And that's when I just delight in God. I'm one with God, and that oneness brings me the ultimate pleasure, that ultimate delight. I would suggest, if it's okay with everyone, Margot, let's start at the top of page 237 so that we don't use the flow of thought. Let's go to the words of Rabbi Steinsaltz that describes this ultimate love, again, that comes from this hitapcha, the second level of transformation of the animalistic desires towards God, and therefore it comes from that oneness of connection with God. Let's go 237. Does anyone want to read?
At the top of the page?
Yes. Love then has two seemingly
right.
Line, yeah. Go ahead, Margot. I guess.
I'll go for it. Okay.
Thank you.
Love then has two seemingly contradictory modes of expression. Love like flaming coals and love of delights, which, as the author will note several lines on, is also known as love like water. Love like fire and love like water seem to be working in opposite ways. True, both are forms of love. Both contain the general desire for relationship, contact, and affection. Beyond this, however, they are fundamentally different. Love, like flaming coals, is the love of one who lacks. It is a love that is born out of thirst, a love that drives the lover to the beloved. But as the lover approaches the object of his love, his thirst only grows stronger. This love is never sated, a love that is a quest, a longing, a craving. Predicted upon lack and distance, it generates an ever-growing tension. For the closer one approaches to God, the more one senses how distant one truly is from him.
Right. So just to elaborate on this just a little bit. So there are two types of love now towards God. And love, I think, in relationships altogether. There is love that's called a fiery love, and there's a love that's called a watery love. The main difference between the two, as Rabbi Steinsaltz points out, is that the fiery love is not a love that comes from oneness. It actually comes from separateness. I'm separated from the subject that I love, but I have this thirst of connection towards that subject. And I do everything in my power to connect, just like a flame. A flame is never one with its source. If it was one with its source, the flame would disappear into that ball of fire. But you can see in the movement of the flame, this tremendous thirst and effort to reconnect to its source. It's separated from its source. So it comes from separateness. But on the other hand, its whole desire is to connect to its source. That's a lower level of love. It's a fiery love because, again, it acts like fire that keeps moving, keeps wanting to connect, but it still hasn't reached that ultimate level of oneness, of connection. So that's one type. And we see that type of love, just to put in the context here of this chapter, of chapter 9, when a person is tremendously bothered by his animalistic desires. So, people, unfortunately, have their own inclinations, have their own even addictions, or have their own demons, as they would call them. Now, nonetheless, there is a fire in us that's never extinguishable. And that fire desires really the truth, desires God. Unfortunately, the animal soul gets the better of us from time to time. But it's not that that fire does not exist. And that fire constantly expresses itself, even during sin, even during failure. When we say to ourselves, gosh, I shouldn't be doing this, but I'm doing this anyway, just because the animal soul is getting the better of me, or in the words of the Talmud, just because the spirit of folly has entered my mind. But I know that there's a fire that desires this, that is unrested, that desires this connection with God. That explains, I think, why, the Jewish approach, at least, is that every human being, in essence, is good, is divine. Unfortunately, that divinity is not always given room for expression. But it doesn't mean that the animal soul that comes and bothers the connection of that divine soul should be the one defining us. We should remain defined as those fires that really yearn a connection with God. I think we see that in so many instances. We see that in people who may seem as far away from possible as divine, but all of a sudden they have a transformation in life. Something happens and things begin to change. Why? Because there was always that fire within them that desired connection. Fortunately, it was separated, and it was never always or very seldom given room for expression, but it's there. That's how the sages, by the way, explain this idea that, we are all walking temples. And if you look at the Jerusalem temple, every utensil of the Jerusalem temple really is parallel to another part of us. So, for example, the Holy of Holies in the Jerusalem temple is our divine soul that remains intact, just like the Holy of Holies the holiness of the Holy of Holies remained intact. There is one part of the temple that expresses just what we're speaking about, and that is the eternal flame, Esh Tamid. Esh Tamid, the eternal flame that always existed on the altar of the temple. Now, that eternal flame is also deep within us. We may sometimes not see it or sense it, but it's always there. There's an eternal flame within each and every one of us that desires connection. That flame, by the way, is just like a regular flame. It's constantly bothering us, and it's restless. It's moving nonstop, aspires to rise. But unfortunately, the animal soul gets the better of us from time to time. But there's an eternal flame. There's an eternal flame. And that eternal flame is really the first level of love. A love that I may not even know that I have. But if I open up my eyes and dig deep within, I'll discover this true yearning for connection with something greater than me, connection with the divine. And that is really what this fiery love is all about. Again, I can go on and on with so many examples, but the example that comes to mind, I don't know why, but the example of Daniel Pearl. I'm sure you remember Daniel Pearl, who was beheaded by evil terrorists, a journalist who called himself a universalist, who was Jewish, but he had no parent connection with Judaism. He had married out of the faith, and he wasn't defining himself as Jewish. Yet, just before he passed, just before they beheaded him, he, for some supernatural reason, proclaimed to the world and to his terrorists that were murdering him at that moment, I am a Jew, my father is a Jew, my mother is a Jew, and my grandfather has a street named after him in Bnei Brak, Israel. And where did that come from? That came from the eternal flame. That came from that fiery love that sometimes does not necessarily express its desire to connect with oneness, with its true identity, but it's nonetheless always there. That's the first level of love. I'd love to hear your comments, your ideas, because I don't want to be monologuing, as I often say, but then we can continue with the second level of love. Does anyone want to share a comment, an idea? Okay, then let's continue now with this first level that he continues, that Rabbi Stans continues to speak about, and then we'll get to the second level of love. Go for it, Margot.
Okay. Although this is a holy love, a love directed to God, it shares with other loves a certain egotistical element. Most worldly loves are, in essence, the love of self. A person loves himself, and for the sake of his self-love, he needs something. When a person plucks a flower and says that he loves flowers, he doesn't love flowers. He loves himself. And to satisfy his self-love, he needs flowers. The same is often true of love between people, love between husband and wife, between parents and children. Hasidim used to point out that the expression, they love one another in Yiddish, zij hoben zich lieb, also means they love themselves. In this sense, any love, like flaming coals, is a form of self-love. The object of such love can be a great variety of things and can even be God, but such love of God can be said to be a desire like all other desires, because it is predicted upon a human lack. Obviously, the more mundane the object of love is, the more pronounced is the lover's lust, and the more the so-called love of the object is shown to be a fallacy. When a person says he loves fish, we know that he means that he loves to eat fish. When he says that he loves wisdom, we tend to view his love in less selfish terms. But even in its finer forms, a person's expression of love towards someone or something might be no more than a love for that person or thing, than a love of fish is a love for the fish. For as long as a love is driven by lack and need, its dominant feature is the lover's want.
Right. So just to continue on to explain this fiery love, because this fiery love comes from separateness, as we explain, and because we only feel it at moments of tremendous spiritual awakening, we don't always recognize that this love really wants something that is beyond us, that is selfless. Now, it exists, it bothers us, just like a flame that's within it, but we don't always have maybe the integrity, or sometimes also the courage to go and dig deep and find out exactly what it's all about. But it's there. It's there. And we sense it. We just don't know exactly what it is. Now, because we sense it, we try and express it in some ways. And some of those ways can be very selfish. So it's almost like, it's almost like I don't know if you've experienced it. Sometimes, there's the Woody Woodpecker story, but it exists all the time. Sometimes you go to a place you go to a meeting, to an office, and you're in a meeting, and the air conditioning unit is making so much noise, and it's at the back of your mind, right? Have you ever experienced such a thing? Or you're in your house and there's a leak, and that leak is driving you crazy, but there's nothing you can do about it because the roofers can only come tomorrow morning. So background noises, I'm sure you've all experienced. Those background noises, and psychologists will tell you this, in some shape or form will have an effect on you. You'll be doing things during that meeting because of the air conditioning unit that you may not even be aware that you are doing, but it's just because that noise is bothering you so much that all of a sudden, I don't know, you're cringing. All of a sudden, you're drinking water much more. Or if you have a roof leak, all of a sudden, you're not sleeping. Those background noises have an effect on us. Same here. We have this flame, this eternal flame within us. And if we don't have the courage to dig deep and to analyze it and recognize that it wants God, it will still make noise. But that noise will cause us to do all these things that we may not even be aware of. And some of those things, sometimes, as Rabbi Steinzler explains, are very selfish. I know that I want to love, but because I'm not courageous enough to discover exactly where this love comes from, or where this yearning for love comes from, then I'll express it in a very selfish way. That love won't be given room for its full and honest and complete expression. And that love will express itself in, so in our context of here, this love is internal love for God. Sometimes I'll say, you know what? I hear this noise, right? Like the air conditioning unit. I feel it. I sense it. There's nothing I can do about this because it's in here. It's bothering me. But I'll go and I'll express this love by maybe reading a good book to try and soothe my intellectual pursuits. Now, we're thinking that it's really to try and soothe my intellectual pursuits, but it's really because I have this noise that wants some type of connection. So we take a book and we selfishly read it, even though that's really not what this love wants. I hope I'm explaining myself well here. So there's this noise that is causing us to do all sorts of things, but very often because, again, we are not giving it full expression, it's causing us to do things that are quite selfish, like this love that Rabbi Steinzal is speaking about. And therefore, it's only really the first level of love. It's not the ultimate level of love. And I think, therefore, the remedy for this type of selfish love is to dig deep and to analyze where this yearning comes from. Where does this air conditioning unit come from? Why is it making such noise? And if I am courageous enough to really dig deep and discover the source of it all, the root of it all, then I'll find out that really it wants love that is so much more than selfish. It's love that is completely selfless. Love that wants oneness, not separateness. And that's the higher type of love, which is like water that we're about to speak about. I hope that was clear. But please feel free to ask questions or add your comments and ideas. So I just want to share, maybe just to develop this a little bit more. A great story that I just read on Shabbat yesterday, but this is a story about a rabbi, I forget his name, but he was once traveling and he came to an inn, to a hotel, and he was given a room to sleep in. And as soon as he woke up in the morning, he ran to the innkeeper and he says, I have to ask you a question. There's this clock in my room that I think is a very special clock. Where did he get it from? And the innkeeper says, what are you talking about? No special clock. I got a whole bunch of clocks. It's a clock like any other clock in any other room. Leave me alone. He says, no, you know, there's something very, very special about this clock. You have to find out for me where you got it. The innkeeper says, fine, let me do my research. He did his research. He came back to him and he told the Rebbe, look, you were right. This clock came from somewhere very special. It came from the seer of Lublin. Seer of Lublin was one of the great, more dominant Hasidic masters in Hasidic history. He was called a seer because he was really gifted with this sense of prophecy. Many miracle stories about him. He was a great scholar too. The Choiza of Lublin, that was his full Hebrew name, the seer of Lublin. That's where the clock came from. And then the innkeeper now, it was his turn to ask the questions. He said to this Rebbe, how did you know that this clock was like it was not like any other clock? There was a special clock. And the Rebbe says, look, because this clock, when it ticked, every second or every minute, whenever it ticked with the melody of tremendous joy and happiness. Most clocks that I encounter, when they tick with ticks of melancholy and sadness, as if to say, gosh, I've wasted another moment of my life. Another second, another minute has gone down the drain. This clock, when I heard it throughout the night, when it ticked, it said, I did so much. I did another mitzvah. It's joyous. I'm bringing the Mashiach closer. It's a joyous tick. So I had to find out exactly where it came from. Now it's no wonder that it came from the seer of Lublin. Why am I saying this? I'm just thinking of the story because we have ticks in here, whether we sense them or not. We have ticks in here from that eternal flame that we're speaking about. If we're not courageous enough to find out what's that melody that it wants to tick, then we'll do all sorts of things. And most of those things will be selfish. Just like the noise of the air conditioning will make us cringe, or drink water more, like we said. Make us do things. But we have to be courageous enough to really figure out where's that tick coming from and what type of melody does it really want to have. And if we can be courageous enough to really analyze that clock of ours within those ticks of ours, then we'll find out that it comes from this mere desire, this utter desire to connect with God, just for the sake of connection, just to be one with God. Almost like a baby who wants to be one with his mother after he's been fed. Just wants to be in the embrace of his mother. So too, that's really the deepest desire of our soul, to be one with God. And then we'll become more selfless. And then we'll also be able to truly actualize our divine purpose in this world. But that's really the idea. Let's find out what those ticks are all about.